The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Yesterday, the second day of the Democratic National Convention, the most newsworthy day where the news was not a plagiarized speech of the two conventions so far. Former President Bill Clinton speaking a good speech. I do feel like he's lost a little bit of energy in the last 15 years, probably not an unusual thing. He still has it, told stories about the narrative about Hillary Clinton from the Republican convention compared to the narrative that we are hearing at the Democratic convention. Let's look at a little bit of Bill Clinton.
How does this square? How does this square with the things that you heard at the Republican convention? What's the difference in what I told you and what they said? How do you square it? You can't. One is real, the other is made up. And you just have to decide. You just have to decide which is which, my fellow Americans. The real one had done more positive change making before she was 30 than many public officials do in a lifetime in office.
So a good speech from Bill Clinton, really getting a good reaction from the crowd. And one of the moments that maybe got one of the strongest reactions from the crowd, and certainly from Bernie Sanders, was when Bernie Sanders' brother, Larry Sanders, who lives abroad, cast the Democrats abroad delegation's votes in favor of Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, very emotional, one of the more emotional moments of the roll call vote, which ultimately led to the official nomination of Hillary Clinton. Here is Larry Sanders.
I want to bring before this convention the names of our parents, Eli Sanders and Dorothy Glassberg Sanders. They did not have easy lives, and they died young. They would be immensely proud of their son and his accomplishments. They loved him.
Democrats.
They loved the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt and would be especially proud that Bernard is renewing that vision. It is with enormous pride that I cast my vote for Bernie Sanders.
Thank you very much. Democrats abroad, you have cast 7 votes for Secretary Clinton and 10 votes for Senator Sanders.
Some people wanted Bernie Sanders to fight on, but really he was left with no fight to fight. This was the reality. He was the progressive. Hillary Clinton is the moderate. He was potentially screwed by the DNC, but it's nomination day. He did the only thing he could, which was to either participate in the process or not to. He decided participating was better than not, ultimately asking for the official nomination of Hillary Clinton, which we will play now.
Vermont casts our votes. 22 votes for our beloved Senator Sanders. And 4 for the next president, Hillary Clinton. It is now my honor to present our Senator Bernie Sanders.
Right.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I move that the convention suspend the procedural rules. I move that all votes cast by delegates be reflected in the official record. and I move that Hillary Clinton be selected as the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States.
And that was it, but not it. Only the beginning for many delegates and many protesters, angry, walking out, some who were never originally in the convention center, protesting outside. We will show you some pictures of that. And of course, Ben Dixon will be joining us later to talk about this. There was an article on Common Dreams which alleged serious and total betrayal by Bernie Sanders. And I don't know, we were all Sanders supporters here in the room. Rachel, do you feel that there has been a betrayal by Bernie Sanders here in some way?
I don't really feel like there's been a betrayal per se, because I don't really think he had any other option in this instance. What else could he feasibly do to change the future trajectory? Yeah, and that's the way I feel at this time. This is not a justification of anything the DNC did. This is not an excuse of the fact that clearly the DNC had its, to say its fingers, I would say its full weight on the scales in favor of Hillary Clinton. I understand the frustration, and as we will hear from Ben Dixon later, were the protests anti-DNC or anti-Hillary or anti-Bernie, or what was it? To me, Lewis, there was not a betrayal here. There was a very unfortunate reality where the only thing Bernie had left was to participate in the process to the extent he was able.
Yeah, the betrayal was by the DNC.
Yeah.
Bernie did not betray anyone. I know that some people are just very angry and upset, but yeah, what's he going to do? What could he possibly do? He could make a big fuss. He could put up a fight.
Hillary was going to be the nominee.
Hillary was going to be the nominee, and even if Bernie put up the biggest fight he could, it's not going to change that Hillary would be the nominee. So he has to try to unite the party instead of, I don't think he succeeded, but that's what he had to try to do.
We have now the first major party nominee for president that is female. And to me, this is significant. And I've been very clear that I don't believe in voting for someone based on their genitals. And in fact, I voted for Bernie Sanders, having never seen his genitals, I might add, because of his politics, because of his positions. That being said, Hillary Clinton being the first major candidate female nominee has significance to me. And Rachel, I've been talking to a lot of parents who have daughters who say, this really feels big to me. This really feels big. And Sam Cedar, host of the Majority Report, said to me that now his daughter actually sees, not in theory, that a woman can do whatever a man can do, but actually there is a female nominee, not a president yet. How do you feel about this as a woman?
I definitely agree with you in terms of kind of trying to reject identity politics and kind of looking at, okay, who is the best candidate and who is ideologically in alignment with my own beliefs. So I would definitely agree with you on that sentiment. However, I also kind of agree with Michelle Obama's sentiment in saying, okay, I have these daughters and now they're seeing that this can be a reality. And how is this going to change the course of what they think is feasible for them to accomplish in their lives?
Growing up, intellectually, you knew there was nothing banning a woman from being president of the United States or banning a woman from being a major party nominee, but you didn't actually see it. So does that feel different in some way to you?
For me personally, it doesn't, because I grew up with parents who continually instilled in me that I could do anything regardless of my gender, and I'm from a very progressive liberal town. So for me personally, it didn't, but I can see how for a lot of people, it would really change how they think about it.
Let's talk a little bit about what is going on with Donald Trump and Russia and Vladimir Putin. Of course, we've been following this very, very closely, and it turns out that the Donald Trump-Russia-Putin connection may be even bigger than we thought. Now, previously, we knew that Putin had called Trump bright and very talented. Trump had spoken with some admiration on multiple occasions about Vladimir Putin's political strength. Yesterday, I told you that numerous internet security experts have said that the DNC WikiLeaks release and the hacks had many indications of coming from Russian intelligence agencies, and this has continued to grow over the last 12 to 24 hours. Now, this brings up the question of whether Russia and Vladimir Putin would do something like this merely to embarrass the U.S. or because they actually believe they would benefit from Donald Trump being president or from Hillary Clinton not being president. We are now learning and hearing way, way more about possible Trump-Russia connections. And the important thing when we talk about this is that whether or not this line of reasoning helps Hillary Clinton's campaign, we want to focus on whether it's true regardless. I understand that the Hillary campaign is very keen on repeating these talking points about a connection between Trump and Russia, and that is being used as a way to discredit those. Let's just focus on what we know aside from whether it benefits Hillary Clinton or not. In other words, even if there is motive to say these are just Clinton campaign talking points to make Trump look bad, this could make Trump look bad and still be true. We're still getting more information on this. According to the Daily Beast, quote, it's an operation that several U.S. officials now suspect was a deliberate attempt to influence the presidential election in favor of Donald Trump. And first of all, conservative columnist George Will, who admittedly does not like Donald Trump, thinks that the reason Trump won't release his tax returns is because they would reveal links between Trump and Russia. Here is conservative George Will on conservative Fox News saying this.
On the connection between Russia and the Trump campaign, but they've thrown it out there, George.
Well, it's the sort of thing we might learn if we saw the candidate's tax returns. And that's perhaps one more reason why we're not seeing his tax returns, because he is deeply involved in dealing with Russian oligarchs and others. Whether
yeah,
it's good, bad, or indifferent, it's probably a reasonable surmise.
So maybe George Will's not reliable. He clearly doesn't like Trump. What is he saying? But in addition to this, there is growing evidence now that Russian troll factories posing as pro-Trump Americans have been posting all over the internet to try to shape public opinion. This is a really big topic. I've talked about it before. There are these Russian troll factories where people, it's professional trolling, they get together and typically they post pro-Kremlin stuff all over the internet, anywhere you can. YouTube comments, blog comments, news site comments, Twitter, Reddit, all of these different platforms. And freelance journalist Adrian Chen, who's now a staff writer at The New Yorker, discovered that at one point the Kremlin was likely paying some of these troll factories to spread pro-Trump propaganda on social media. This is what Chen had to say. I created this list of Russian trolls when I was researching, and I check on it once in a while still. And a lot of them have turned into conservative accounts, like fake conservatives. I don't know what's going on, but they're all tweeting about Donald Trump and stuff. There are two possible motives here. Number one, Russia genuinely wants to get Donald Trump elected because they, quote, like him, to put it simply. Option two is Russia wants to get Trump elected because they think, like some in China believe, as I told you yesterday, that Trump would be such an embarrassment that it would help Russia compete globally and it would increase public opinion of them. This is a speculative case, but it is not negated by the Republican National Committee's recent change on their stance on Russia under pressure from Trump's staff in the days leading up to the convention in Cleveland last week. One delegate actually proposed an amendment calling for the U.S. to provide eastern Ukraine with lethal defensive weapons. And according to the Washington Post, Trump's allies pushed to weaken that statement, instead saying they would provide appropriate assistance instead of lethal defensive weapons. Lewis, it is a circumstantial case right now, but it is one that is increasingly connected to empirical facts.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the financial connections. I mean, when you're a billionaire, yes, you, especially a billionaire like Trump, who has hosted events in Russia and is a schmoozer, if you will, not difficult to be financially involved in your statements, wherever, on video and pictures with Russian oligarchs.
Right.
And that's not the biggest deal to me. Russia, of course, wants to make things more difficult for the United States, and they want to make things better for themselves. Would a Trump presidency do that? Probably. And the troll stuff, this sounds like China to me, and not surprising at all. I mean, it seems like a pretty cheap and effective way to kind of give
sway
Trump a
public
boost.
opinion. Yeah.
Definitely. But I also think that who is the candidate? Okay, if Putin's trying to kind of put forth his message of destabilizing the West, would that come in the form of Hillary Clinton, or would that come in the form of a Donald Trump puppet?
Yeah, that's the thing. You might say we want Trump over Hillary because their policies will actually be more beneficial to Russia. Or you might say, oh, Hillary's way more competent. So just Trump's incompetence is what we want to seize and take advantage of. That's why the whole bromance between Putin and Trump narrative is not actually the most compelling, because Putin is probably smarter than that. Putin must recognize that he's not popular in the US and that any actual alliance between Trump and Putin is not particularly likely, although Trump has said he would talk to everybody. You would think Putin is thinking on a deeper level, which is actually Trump will be more manipulatable or just incompetent in a way that allows Russia to improve its standing globally or whatever. We're going to have some fact checking tomorrow about what Trump has said regarding his relationship or lack thereof with Vladimir Putin and what the evidence actually shows. That's tomorrow. We'll take a break for now.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, big day today. Today's new member of the day is Nick Wilson. Nick is someone who has access to the world famous bonus show, where I told a story yesterday, Lewis, that by all accounts was compelling and fascinating. That was the feedback I got about the story I told.
That's an understatement.
Yeah.
Yeah, really.
Understatement of the year. Bigger understatement than Trump may be underqualified to be president. Sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. If you ever shop on Amazon, davidpakman.com/Amazon. Okay, I do want to take a quick break from DNC stuff. I do want to get to Hatriot Mail. It's gotten a little bit crazy in our email inbox. I'll remind you about Hatriot Mail.
It's like taking an apple pie, filling it with pages from the Old Testament, topping it with hollow points, and serving it with a side of homophobia. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Yeah, so this Hatriot Mail is going to sort of encompass a number of the common themes that are critiques. When we get Hatriot Mail that is not specifically issue-oriented, it tends to follow a certain sort of patriotic linear path, and this is certainly no exception to that. Take a look.
So it's the kike Jew David. Apparently this Jew kike David, the dick-sucking ball licker. Listening to this dildo breathe Pakman is like Americans killing other Americans, while this Jew and its tribe laughs at you, but you don't hear them. They do this and at categorically, and white a goyim Gentiles being normal and with a forgiving heart are caught off guard by the animal plans of the Jew kike Yudin. These folk pigs wish only eventually for your demise. Screw you, liar, Jew, Fudge Pakman.
It's interesting how everything about this show seems to be related to either me being Jewish or an immigrant from South America, or incorrectly identified as a gay man. You'd think on some issue, Lewis, there would be a different type of critique.
Occasionally there is. Occasionally there's a critique of the issues, and it's about you being a bleeding heart liberal scumbag.
Right.
That happens. That's not the general theme.
No, it's refreshing when that is actually what we hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fight the Hatriots. Become a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Okay. We have statements from Julian Assange of WikiLeaks fame. He spoke in a CNN interview after these nearly 20,000 emails were released that were taken from the Democratic National Committee, suspected by Russian hackers. And he refused to confirm or deny whether there was a Russian origin for this email leak, saying WikiLeaks deliberately creates ambiguity to protect all sources. But he did say, I don't know if we can call it a warning or a promise or merely a statement of what is to come, that there is going to be, quote, a lot more material released relevant to the U.S. electoral campaign. He was, of course, speaking from the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he is still facing extradition over sexual assault allegations if he were to leave that embassy. Some suggesting, and this is one of those vague terms, there have been articles written without any particular reason to think this, that say it could be indictable in terms of what might be revealed about Hillary Clinton by the upcoming leaks. And my concern, Lewis, is I don't think that there is anything particularly bad about informing people about things that happen that are dishonest or immoral or whatever. Although I've said many times, I don't advocate for breaking the law in terms of hacking. Of course, WikiLeaks as far as we are told, not actually doing the hacking, but merely receiving information that was obtained by hacking and then releasing it. The problem I have is I totally get the entire, if there's corruption, we want to expose it thing. If the impact of it is that you are going to help elect Donald Trump, what greater good is being served? And this is where people split. They say, no, you know what? Julian Assange can't sit there and be the arbiter of when it makes sense to reveal corruption or insider whatever or immorality or whatever. He gets documents and he releases them. If they have an impact in the world, they have an impact in the world. It's not a very, it's a very sort of black and white way of looking at this, because depending on what you release and when, you are choosing to impact the world around you in a particular way. So I don't know. How do you feel about that?
It has to be some type of calculated move to not just release everything the second you get it. And if they wanted to be more transparent, if they wanted to be cleared of bias or having an agenda, that should be their policy, is as soon as they receive whatever information it is, all of it is released.
As soon as they've vetted it, redacted what they feel they need to redact for keeping people's identities private or whatever.
Yeah, but generally you get the idea.
Yeah, but that's clearly not his policy, because he's also stated his opinions on Hillary Clinton. And I feel like people who are questioning if this was routine cyber espionage or if it was kind of more astutely saying, okay, we're going to do this exactly when the election is happening. How could that be possible if it was released right then?
Well, that's the question that was asked of Assange in terms of the timing. If you believe that Russian intelligence was involved in the theft, hacking, procuring of these leaks, documents, emails, if you believe that, it stands to reason that they did it and gave it to Julian Assange at a time that would have an impact based on what they wanted. So the question to Assange asked by CNN during this interview that I watched was, aside from the fact that you protect your sources, what if you were being manipulated in terms of the timing by Russian intelligence? And he didn't really have an answer for that. He went back to this position of, well, we vet the documents and we release them if we believe that they are worthwhile. And there really is no answer to that, because who really knows if those are the intentions of Russian intelligence?
And you can't know, but it's undeniable that this was important information.
Right.
And so I say, just release it all. And if you do have an agenda, whatever, it's important information. I want to know it. I want the American people to know it. And even if it leads to a Donald Trump presidency, so be it, because Americans should know who they're electing as president. And if it gets worse with Hillary, we should know.
Hack Donald Trump's tax returns then. If it's important to know who we're dealing with as president, get those tax returns, right? Because that's something we really should have a look at. It's something every presidential candidate for 40 years has shown us and Trump refuses to. Now, if this were to bring down Hillary Clinton, if whatever information Julian Assange will be releasing brings down Hillary Clinton and by default elects Donald Trump, it seems sort of like a Pyrrhic victory of sorts. Now, it's not exactly right. Typically, with a Pyrrhic victory, we're talking about a victory that inflicts such a devastating toll on the eventual winner that it is effectively like being defeated. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's in the victory of releasing information and informing the public, you end up electing someone that will have a far more devastating impact on the public. That does seem like a practical concern to me, Rachel, when we think about the practical impact of this.
I mean, yeah, it's definitely a practical concern, but I think he would have to definitely think long and hard. Is this information going to benefit people if Donald Trump is elected by default?
So you believe he should weigh that?
Yes.
Lewis, do we have any evidence that Julian Assange weighs that?
We don't have that evidence. But there's also, if it leads to a Donald Trump presidency, presumably would be a disaster. At least everyone involved will learn from what happened before, and maybe in the long term, it would be better for everybody.
It would be one of those teachable moments that allows Donald Trump to appoint 3 to 4 Supreme Court justices that could have a devastating impact on this country for decades
to come. I bet the DNC will never make that mistake again after that.
We will at least learn, Rachel.
Right.
And for that, we can be grateful.
Right.
It's hard for me to get behind that logic. That's the tear it all down because in 20 years, it'll get better logic.
It's not exactly that. It's just about learning from our mistakes. And sometimes you need to have a very harshly learned lesson, if you will. I don't know. Tough love. I don't know what you'd want to call it. But let's think about that. Let's think about the very long term.
lots of emails coming into me from people lately saying, David, wouldn't a Hillary Clinton presidency be bad for your business or bad for progressive media? The answer is probably yes. I've actually spoken to a number of progressive hosts over the last 6 months. I won't name them. It's their business if they want to say they've had these conversations. And the consensus was we all get Donald Trump would be terrible for this country. It would be not good for the world, but it would be way better for our shows. And the bottom line is 12 years of Democratic presidents, which is what we would have at the end of Hillary Clinton's first term if she were to win, would not likely be that good for progressive shows. And there's this discussion that we've been having where we essentially all feel this way. I don't know anyone who actually wants Trump to be elected merely because it would be better for our shows. I'll put that out there. I would rather the country not be embarrassed internationally, even more than it was by George W. Bush, in order to have a more profitable 4 years. And there are sort of two reasons why a Hillary presidency would be much worse for us than Trump would. Number one, if you get 12 consecutive years of Democratic presidents, there would be this feeling in the midst of so many years of Democrats that liberal media's role is less important, less necessary in some way. Now, I reject that completely. It would be wrong. I think that during Democratic presidential years, it's actually the most important time for progressive media because you have a better opportunity to get real change when there is a president that is closer to your political beliefs in the White House. Which is much more likely with Hillary Clinton than Donald Trump, although, yes, she would be one of the more moderate or centrist Democrats in a while. Now, the second reason I believe progressive media would do worse under Hillary Clinton in the White House versus Donald Trump is that there will be this sort of feeling that change will happen naturally with a Democrat in the White House when that completely ignores what's going on in the House and Senate. And we've talked about that many, many times, Louis. Look at what's happened with President Obama. Republican obstruction for almost all of his 2 terms of presidency. And many of his biggest accomplishments have happened with incredible effort required, pulling teeth to get anything done, or executive action. So although I understand that the perception of the need of or importance of progressive media would be diminished with a Hillary win, I actually think that it would be the most important time for progressive media to try to achieve real change.
It would be important. And like you said, there's still going to be plenty of obstructionism. And there could very well be completely Republican-controlled Congress, right? Yeah. And that would still make for plenty of juicy stories and headlines and crazy things being said by politicians all the time. People far crazier than Donald Trump, mind you.
I would agree with the sentiment that a Trump win would be better for progressive media, although I strongly disagree with the reasoning that is making people believe that. We'll take a break. Next, we'll go to Philadelphia. We will talk to Benjamin Dixon. We will also talk to Jackie Coppell, both on the ground there.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Let's go now to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, the location of the Democratic National Convention. Ben Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show, is joining us. He was up very, very late last night, which seems to be the theme of day 2 of the Democratic National Convention. Ben, there were media reports of protests, a delegate walkout when Bernie Sanders called for the nomination of Hillary Clinton. You were in the thick of it. Was this bigger, maybe, than corporate media made it out to be?
David, it was far bigger than anyone made it out to be. I have several videos that I'll try to get over to you so you can share with your audience of thousands of protesters. So many protesters. It was actually 2 shifts. It started at about 7:30 was the first protest. Those protesters, every bit of 4,000 people. Then there was a second wave of protesters that came through, including a Black Lives Matter group and including Dr. Jill Stein and the Green Party. So those 2 groups combined made for every bit of 5,000 to 6,000 people. And so what I saw from a lot of people saying, corporate media covering it, saying it was only 300 or 400 people, that was so far from the truth. And we have plenty of videos to prove it.
And then talk to me about the number 5,000 to 6,000. Is that your estimate? Was that an official estimate that somebody who's I don't know has expertise in estimating crowd size made?
So that was our estimate, just based on the length of the protest. I mean, it went on and on. It actually was a very conservative estimate. No one actually provided a real estimate, an official measurement of it of any type. But just looking at the number of people that we encountered for, I mean, hundreds and hundreds of yards, probably even the length of a mile. There were people just everywhere. And so you really have to look at the videos to see how many people were there. But the official tally coming from, or estimate from the mainstream media, said 300 or 400. Without a doubt, David, there were far many more people than that.
And tell me a little bit about what the goal was, or subject matter of the protest. In other words, was it a movement angry with Bernie for supporting Hillary Clinton? Was it a movement that was just anti-Hillary Clinton? Was it anti-Trump? I mean, you tell me.
No, it was 100% anti-DNC. It was a message to the Democratic Party that they are no longer supporting the Democratic Party, and that they will not vote for Hillary Clinton. There were some breakout groups. There was a Black Lives Matter protest there, speaking specifically to racial issues in context of the Democratic Party. Dr. Jill Stein came and she began speaking on her platform. And really, when she came on the scene, it really, I think that was like the climax of the night. Once she came on the scene, very shortly after, the riot police showed up in large numbers and aligned themselves in front of the protesters, in front of the main gate. And, they really didn't do anything, but the optics of it was very obviously sent to be intimidating. But the protesters didn't relent. Matter of fact, they actually sat down right in front of the riot police, and it ended pretty peacefully. I think there was a few scuffles here and there, but nothing that warranted the riot police.
Hey, Ben, Rachel here. I just had a quick question.
Hi, Rachel.
I don't know if you talked to anyone individually, but how organized did you feel that this movement was? Did you feel like it was fragmented, or do you kind of feel like they came in with a clear mindset of what they wanted to accomplish and what they were standing for, or did you feel like it kind of crumbled apart?
So I would say there's, when I mentioned there was two waves, the very first wave stemmed from a rally in the park that was a very well organized rally. But I don't feel like the people who were there, the audience and the participants, I didn't feel like they were organized at all. I often felt like they were disconnected from even the message of the rally. That's what was happening around 6:30 to 7:30. And that was just my gauge of the audience and the crowd. However, when it shifted gears into the full protest, they were very, very targeted, very organized, and they really had a definitive purpose for why they were out there, and they wanted one message to be heard. I can't say the word on the show, but essentially F the DNC was the primary message.
And yesterday when we spoke to you, you sort of agreed with our other correspondents on the ground that the anti-Hillary or lack of unity sentiment was actually not that significant in terms of how Democratic and progressive voters are ultimately going to vote in November. Do you still feel that way after what went on yesterday? I mean, you're seeming to say it was mostly an anti-DNC sentiment, which does not, you can be anti-DNC and still recognize Trump would be a disaster. So how do you feel like these protests relate to what voting decisions people are going to make?
You know what, David, I have, and I kept saying this to on my broadcast last night, that I really can't say what type of electoral impact this would have. But I would say 90% or more of the people out there, and we went through the crowd multiple times, listened to the crowd, got interviews. They are not going to support Hillary Clinton underneath any circumstances. Some of them will not support Hillary Clinton simply for Hillary Clinton. The bulk of them will not support Hillary Clinton because of the DNC, the DNC leaks, the emails, all those controversies. So it's a combination. There's absolutely no unity with those people who were on the outside on yesterday. Even though I really believe it was between 5,000 and 6,000 people throughout the entire evening, we still have no idea what type of electoral impact that actually signifies.
All right. Benjamin Dixon, host of the Benjamin Dixon Show in Philadelphia. Excellent, excellent stuff, Ben. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, David.
We are staying in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, going now to Jackie Coppell, political commentator and satirist. Check her out at newsynews.tv. Jackie, we heard about some of the protests. We've been talking a little bit about the delegate walkout. And talk to me about your sense of this. I mean, is there a consensus as to exactly how important these protests and walkouts have been, or do different people have a different sense of the size and scope?
People have really different sense of the size and scope. And it all comes down to vested interest, right? So some people are claiming these protests, are massive and that there are, potential clashes. But that hasn't, as far as I'm aware, that actually hasn't necessarily happened. The difference between the RNC and the DNC is the RNC felt really militarized. Just everywhere you went, there were cops lined up, intimidatingly. Although they were very nice, I do want to say they were lovely. But rows and rows of police, whether it's officers or literal troopers, sort of running around the city. It was interesting to experience what it was probably like under a military occupation and what it would feel like. It doesn't feel that way in Philly at all, right? There are certainly cops around and cops in groups and folks are there, but it's just not the same, it's just not the same intensity. And it feels like the cops are allowing people to express themselves in whatever way, shape, or form they want to. And by and large, I think it's been pretty peaceful.
Yesterday, Bill Clinton's speech, I thought, was very, very good, although, currently he doesn't have the exact same level of energy as he did 15 or 20 years ago. What's your sense of what speeches were particularly well received or not so well received?
Sure. Oh, sorry, one other thing I wanted to say about the protests. The sit-in, there's a lot of mixed messaging on the sit-in too, or the sit-ins that have happened. Some people are saying it was, over 100 delegates walked out. And then I spoke to someone who was in the media center and he was like, yeah, it was like 30 people. So, and not all of them were necessarily delegates. So again, it's a little unclear, the numbers. And, I think for people who want the protests to seem, bigger, obviously they want those numbers to be reported bigger. And those who don't want them to seem as big probably are diminishing the numbers. So it is honestly really tough to get a really clear picture of what is actually happening. But I will say the general feeling in the Wells Fargo Center is one of positivity. And I think everyone inside feels like they are, at least to me, feels like they are extremely respectful and appreciative of what Senator Sanders has done, and a real sense of he did something great and now let's go defeat Donald Trump. And we've made history. A lot of positive themes actually are what is felt on the ground. And I think a lot of that is not necessarily reported, that there is it feels like quite a lot of coming together overall. In terms of Bill Clinton's speech, I think people loved it. I think generally speaking, we didn't know what to expect. And it was a speech defending his wife and their story together and their history. And I think, generally speaking, it seems like it was very well received. Certainly in the hall, you sort of couldn't hear a pin drop. And that was really, I think it was very moving for people in general. Certainly he's not the same as he was 15, 20 years ago, but he's older. He's not going to be the same as he was 15, 20 years ago. Without question, it's going to be different. So, I thought he did a great job, and I think overall, generally speaking, people felt that he did a pretty great job. So I think that, I think he helped his wife. We'll see how much, but a lot of people say it really helped. The humanizing factor was very helpful.
Well, who among us is the same as we were 15 to 20 years ago? Not me, that's for sure.
Well, that is true. We were barely above diapers, so
Jackie Coppell checking in from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania at the DNC. Thanks, Jackie.
Thanks so much. It's always a pleasure. I look forward to it tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I've been talking to you about a police tool called Stingray for a long time. Back in December of 2014, I told you that we learned police were using this technology to eavesdrop on Eric Garner protesters. Eric Garner was the man killed by police in New York when selling untaxed cigarettes. And back in September, I told you that 2,000 cases were at risk of being overturned because police used this technology. This is the technology that creates what are called cell site simulators. They look like cell phone towers to cell phones. So the cell phones will transmit pings back to the Stingray devices, which let law enforcement track a phone's location with no warrant. The ACLU has been involved in a lot of these cases. And the big news, and this is really, really big, for the first time, a federal judge has thrown out evidence obtained without a warrant by U.S. law enforcement with Stingray technology. This is U.S. District Judge William Pauley in Manhattan, ruling that defendant Raymond Lambis's rights were violated when the DEA used the Stingray device without a warrant, saying it is effectively unreasonable search and seizure. This is hugely important because of the precedent that it sets. It's something, there's this thing called parallel construction, which can make it more difficult to suppress evidence like this. And the way parallel construction works in law enforcement is you might be using warrantless surveillance to build a case in reality, but simultaneously, you'll create a parallel storyline of how you're finding things out, and you can hide sources and confidential informants, etc. And this is a way that this unreasonable search, such as a warrantless surveillance device, can be used, and then you never find out about it in a court of law because there's been this other shadow parallel investigation that was taking place, which didn't actually turn up anything. This is really, really big, Lewis, because of the precedent that it sets. We aren't against finding bad guys. What we are against is having these ambiguous ways in which law enforcement can just play, rather than by established rules, by sort of whatever they think will help them in fishing expeditions.
Certainly, if you have a warrant for using this technology, whatever, it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. And this is just one of many pieces of technology, being used by police in questionable ways and possibly illegal ways. So you're right, huge precedent, and I hope that that other judges around the country will follow suit here.
Good news, right, Rachel? I mean, some people will say, oh, well, you're making it more difficult to catch bad guys. Well, hold on. We need to have rules for how we go about investigations.
Well, is this going to change kind of the course of action where they had originally said, okay, we're going to have these policies, but they're not going to apply to local law enforcement? So is it effectively changing that, or is this a specific case? Yeah,
well, that's the other issue, right? Which is we have this patchwork of various laws. We have federal courts, we have state courts, we have different rules as far as what is allowed and what isn't. If this becomes a broader constitutional issue, Lewis, then it will be a blanket ruling.
Yes, from the federal level, and we'll see. I don't know.
Let's talk about lab-grown meat. We have been talking for so long about the meat industry not being a good industry in terms of pollution, in terms of how animals are treated, the carbon footprint, etc. Lab-grown meat is built, for lack of a better term, from cell samples that grow into the same tissue that is in meat from actual animals. And we've been following this for a long time. Back in 2013, I told you about in vitro cow meat that was created in a lab. It was hugely expensive. And then about a year ago, I told you that the technology advanced enough to drop the price of this lab-grown meat by about 99%. Still pretty expensive, reportedly doesn't taste quite right, but there are some new developments that are getting us closer to this being a viable thing, and scientists that are involved in this research are now optimistic that they can cut the cost even more and get the taste right within about 4 years by 2020, mostly by increasing efficiency and producing milk in bulk. This could mean everything from steaks and burgers and sausages without some of the guilt that's associated with it. Now, of course, it's way easier to replicate ground beef for a burger than an actual steak, but the technology is working on both. And a lot of the issue is that when we think about this, we have to think about, okay, well, which issues in the meat industry are solved by this type of technology, because that's really what it is, and which issues aren't. And we often focus on the vegetarian angle, right? Would vegetarians eat this meat? But maybe that's not the most important angle, Rachel.
I don't think it's necessarily the most important angle. Also, personally, I think if they're taking the tissue from the muscle, it technically is still at its source at the beginning an animal product. But at the same time, you are vastly cutting down on energy sources, greenhouse gas emissions, land use, and associated water use. So wouldn't that be important to think about that as well?
That for me is the bigger issue, Lewis. And when you get down to it, vegetarians are a relatively small part of the population. So as interesting as it is to me theoretically to think about, okay, it was never part of an animal, but it is developed from animal cells originally. So would a vegetarian eat it or not? Very interesting question. But for the most part, the real impact would be if meat eaters would say, oh, this is the sustainable path, I'm going to switch. That's really who could have the biggest impact.
Yeah. And you would assume that as time goes on and this becomes cheaper and easier to produce and manufacture, perhaps even the big factory farms will start thinking, you know, this is really what we need to get into because it just makes way more sense. So I'm envisioning a world, Dave, in the distant future where we have a nice fillet that is better than anything you can get right now from a real cow, and it was made in a lab.
That was going to get to my next question, which is I have no problem with this. I have no problem with this ethically or morally. I think that the environmental and cost benefits are obviously huge, and as the technology improves, that will only become even more pronounced. Would you still have Wagyu? Would you still have gourmet meats or special meats? Right now, there's a pretty big range in terms of meat and beef quality. How does that change the dynamic of what we have, Rachel? I mean, can you say, okay, well, this is lab-grown Wagyu and this is lab-grown regular stuff. If you're building it up cell by cell, maybe it's not, the reason Wagyu is more expensive now is because of how it is produced. There are more production costs. If you're just engineering it cell by cell, why not make it all Wagyu or whatever it is people like?
I mean, definitely. I think that would be an interesting kind of angle to take with constructing this meat, but I think it's ultimately obviously going to go back to tastes of people, and once they're kind of more cognizant of how this is available, they're going to think about, okay, does this actually taste differently? Because I feel like ultimately a lot of people who are eating Wagyu are concerned with taste.
Yes, there's no doubt that is the taste-concerned meat-eating crowd. We'll continue following it. Very, very interesting. We have a voicemail number. We have the first voicemail today about Rachel. It is directed to Rachel. Rachel, you have not heard this voicemail, right? Lewis and I both made it clear it would be better for you not to hear it so we can get your honest reaction now.
Yeah, I confirm I have never heard this before.
Okay. This is pretty intense, Lewis. I mean, is there?
Well, no, it's intense, but it's not malicious or it's not patriotism.
No.
And I'm going to leave Rachel on camera for the duration of this voicemail.
Well, you can switch around because I think we'll all be pretty interested. Let's take a listen to this voicemail, 2192-DAVID-P. Brace yourselves.
Okay.
Hey, yeah, I called you a couple days ago about Rachel. Like, she's really hot. And then I was watching tonight, one of your Hatriot Mails was talking about trannies. By the way, I do love Hatriot Mail. It's really fun. It's funny to watch, especially when they can't spell words right.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't think Rachel's a tranny. She doesn't look like one, but anyway, if she was, I still love her. And I'll tell you, dude, I'd really hit that.
Wow.
She's friggin' gorgeous. Thanks for listening, and I'm not a sexist.
Okay. There was a little bit more, though. There was just one more thing I want you to hear in that.
Go Donald Trump.
Do you want this guy's phone number?
I thought you'd never ask if I wanted it.
Yeah, very, very unusual voicemail, and I don't know what elements are real. I don't know what elements are false of that. Is it offensive? Is it ridiculous? I like the little clarification. I'm not sexist, and go Trump at the very end, in case you were wondering, Rachel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well,
flattering, right?
Is it? I think it's pretty ridiculous.
I guess I'm flattered that someone would still date me if I was tranny. That's nice. I personally have no problem with that at all.
Right. He's making a very open, a message that's very open to the trans community while using a term that's incredibly offensive to the trans community, saying even if Rachel were a tranny, which is a horribly offensive term, that would not dissuade this individual's attraction to you.
Exactly. I guess I was also kind of surprised that he's a Trump supporter and feels
Might be,
but that's good to know, I guess.
Yeah.
That there's some Trump supporters who aren't homophobic.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I won't. I can tell you're still, acclimating yourself to the insanity of that. Okay. On the bonus show today, we have a member who has revealed some shocking rhetoric around the Democratic primary, which we will read to you. Also, there are some wild birds working with humans, and a very, very interesting Holocaust escape tunnel has been discovered. All of those stories and more on the bonus show. DavidPakman.com/membership. Of course, the only way to get access to the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.